There's no way I'm putting this out. Welcome to Music Not Diving. I'm Scuba. So today we're doing something a little bit different. I hardly ever talk about my music on here, and this is not a full episode, but I just thought I'd go over or give some information, a bit of insight into my new release. So this is called Petrology. It came out as part of the official Record Store Day UK 2026 release schedule, and I'll talk about a bit more about that in a minute. But the EP itself has come about really as a result of me trying to make my 5th album for the last 12 years, basically. So I've been through various different stages of this, and this 6-track EP was, I guess, like the result of the last attempt at doing it, essentially. I mean, I'm on to another attempt, but this is a representation of something, a process that I went through, which involved a lot of different things, including making music, but also thinking about concepts. And this is, again, quite unusual for me, but I sometimes have conceptual aspects of the music that I do, but I very rarely, if ever, talk about them explicitly. So I'm going to do a bit of that, contrary to my possibly better judgment. But just on Record Store Day, we talk a lot on the podcast about the importance of record shops, the importance of the ecosystem of shops around the world, and how the role they've played in the development of the dance scene over time, and particularly in the 90s, but of course, in the subsequent couple of decades too, their decline, but there's, I guess, continuing, importance in the way people think about music and the way people interact with music. So Record Store Day, I guess, is an attempt to support the ecosystem of record shops in the UK. What you have to do to be part of the official Record Store Day roster of releases is essentially commit to releasing on the day, but either side of the dates too. So we haven't had it up, for example, on our Bandcamp. I've talked about D2C and the importance of D2C ad infinitum on the podcast, of course, but you can't do that with Record Store Day, or you have to give them a window. So it's a kind of, it's a double-edged sword, basically, but I think it's a really important thing. It's a really great thing that does a lot to, as I said, support the ecosystem of record stores in the UK, and hopefully, maintain their continuing importance. So it was great to be part of that for this release. Now, concepts. I, as mentioned, have been trying to make an album for 12 years at this point, and have had various different approaches to it over that period. The process in question, or the stage in question, was me getting interested in the concept of exploitation. So exploitation of musicians in the case of the music industry, but also of natural resources, of peoples over time, of different just aspects of humanity and civilization around the world. And as a result of doing a sort of deep dive into this, I got really interested in the Potosi silver mine in Bolivia. Now that's that was a convoluted process to eventually end up in that position. But Petrology is the name of the EP, and that petrology is basically the study of rocks and minerals and the composition of those. And the Potosi silver mine is probably the most important mineral deposit in the world. So it was initially famous for silver, and the Spanish conquistadors exploited it to just a mind-blowing and heartbreaking extent, actually, in the detail of it. But it was such that it was basically the largest deposit of silver in the world by a mile. And basically the exploitation of it unleashed this avalanche of silver, this kind of river of silver flowing from South America to Europe, to the extent that it basically destroyed, or the inflation that it caused destroyed large parts of the European economy, paradoxically. There's an extremely interesting documentary about it called The Devil's Miner, which focuses not on the history of the mine, but how it works now, and focuses specifically on child laborers in the mine. And it's just, it's, like I say, heartbreaking in many respects, but just, I think, a really interesting and illuminating window into the human psyche of exploitation. The 6 tracks on the EP correspond quite directly, and it's so against my instincts to actually explain this stuff in detail, but I'm going to do it. So there's 3 tracks per side. The first side tracks are entitled Homing Device, Puppets, and Petrology, and the second side is Tio, 3 parts. So Tio refers to the pre-Christian deity. I was going to say God, but it's not. I mean, I suppose deity does sort of imply God, but it's not quite a god because it's sort of a devil. And the Devil's Miner, the title of the documentary would imply that too. But it's basically a sort of, I don't know, you could sort of see it as a mascot, but it's more than that. It's definitely got a sinister kind of a vibe to it, but it's also the protector of the miners. So this is, there's so many contradictions in this, and the fact that it's pre-Christian, and obviously the conquistadors were Christian, and ostensibly part of the purpose of conquering the Americas was to spread Christianity. So there's all kinds of horrible kind of contradictions and meanderings that you could get into with this. But just to go through the tracks, they're completely different in terms of style. So we've got some really kind of hard, I suppose you could almost say sort of dubstep type stuff on there, really weird, deep atmospheric techno, some stuff which is sort of 85 BPM, I suppose stuff that would fit into the autonomic type genre that we've talked about so much on the show in the past. But just to be specific, the opening track, Homing Device, is super hard edged. It's really, really high impact in a way that I don't even think would work in a club. It's, it seems like a dance floor track, but I would be highly skeptical about whether it would actually work on a dance floor. And it's directly referencing the process of mining, basically. So in a very real kind of this is the impact of pickaxes on rocks. Track 2 is called Puppets, and it's a very deep, slowly developing, I suppose you could call it a techno track, and it represents the process of walking through a mine after you finish work. So you're going to be, hundreds of meters deep in the mountain to get to where you're going to be doing your work for the day. And the process of getting back is this kind of, literally a tunnel-like experience. And there's a lot of samples on the EP from the documentary, but the sample in this track is actually Orson Welles from his little-known TV talk show of the 1970s, where he's interviewing Jim Henson about the success, or the newfound success, of the Muppet Show. And Orson Welles is just this just unbelievably charismatic figure, and his ability to talk in instantly quotable chunks is just amazing. But the reason I picked that passage and put it in there was because the position of the miners over time, over 500 years at this point, is essentially that of a puppet. They've been just exploited and used and had their livelihoods played with over time by different people, from the conquistadors initially, but then to Bolivian owners of the mine, and now to a kind of collective ownership, which hasn't actually, it turns out, improved their conditions that much. So yeah, that was the reason for using that particular sample. And then the final track on side 1 is Petrology, and that is just it's a piece of instrumental music which is directly inspired by footage in a documentary of the mountain at night, basically. So it's just it's up in the Andes. It's this kind of singular rock, which is just been this symbol of both hope, both greed, and also despair. And it gives way from this kind of ethereal section into, again, this really kind of hard hitting percussive element which directly references pickaxes hitting rocks. So the tracks on side 2 are the 3 parts of the Tio track, and this is I would highly recommend watching the documentary to get a visual representation of this. Maybe we'll flick some stuff up on the screen as I'm talking, but it's so surrealist the way the miners interact with the representation of this being is just really weird. They put cigarettes in its mouth, they leave bottles of alcohol next to it. It's fully, a kind of interactive experience that they have, or interactive kind of relationship that they have with this thing. But once a year there is a big celebration which the miners take part in, but also all their families. So it happens outside the mine, and it's this essentially a big party. They have this huge meal, and there's dancing, and it's just a celebration of this thing which is supposed to be their protector. And so the first part of Tio is a representation of that. It's a very kind of weird kind of dance kind of track, and that gives way then in part 2. It's sort of a representation of someone going to that party and then walking into the mine on their own. So it's the same sort of tempo, the same kind of feel, but it's getting further and further away from the party. And then part 3 of the track is that final kind of descent into the mine itself. And so it slows down and you gradually get further and further into the mountain itself. And the kind of atmospherics of it, I suppose, represent the different minerals and different things that have been found in the mine over the centuries. So it's on blue vinyl, which has always been my favorite color of vinyl. But the reason we did blue is because there's a mineral called voxite, which for quite a long time, I think at least over a century, Potosi was the only place in the world where you could find voxite. So it's this kind of blue, similar to this, and it just seemed like a nice way of doing it, And like I said, transparent blue has always been my favorite kind of vinyl, even though, let's face it, the colored ones don't sound quite as good as the black ones, but visual representations are also important. So Petrology out on Hot Flush Recordings. It's not going to be out on digital in full. There are 2 tracks, the first 2 tracks, Homing Device and Puppets, will be up on streaming services, but the rest of it, you're going to have to buy the physical product, I'm afraid. So yeah, get involved with that. Thanks.